Hello everybody, today I'm going to be showing you how I made this rainbow flower ring holder. So basically you take that off, your rings go on there, and then you pop the little flower head back on. How cute is that? I also did a purple one as well. So if you think that's something that you would like to make, then keep on watching. For this project, you will need some clay in any colors you choose. I use Sculpey Primo, something circular that you can trace for the shape of the base. I just used this piece of paper that I cut out to the size that I needed, a craft knife, a rolling pin to flatten the clay if you don't have a pasta machine, a ruler, some jewelry wire. Choose one that's a little bit on the thicker side. If you have them, a little leaf clay cutter and a little oval clay cutter. However, you can just do the shapes freehand if you don't have these. An extruder, again not essential, but it will help if you have one. Some clay tools, these are the ones that I found helpful for this project. Something to cut the wire with, Sculpey oven bake clay adhesive, acetone, and some gloss spray. If you're Australian, you can get this one at Bunnings and it's really good. I'm gonna start by cutting out the base. You want it to be quite thick, so I've put it through the thickest setting on my pasta machine, and then I'm gonna double it over as well. This is just because you want the base to be really strong and sturdy. Whatever size you want the base to be, just find something circular so that you can trace around it to get the perfect circle. I couldn't find anything, so I just cut out this circle piece of paper. Next, roll out a really long piece of clay because we need to make a piece that goes around the edge of the base. Wrap it around the base and then make a little mark so you know how much excess you need to cut off. Then suss out how tall you want the piece to be. Make sure it's going to be tall enough because we're going to be putting fake soil in here, so you don't want it to be too short. And then make a little mark in there so you know how much to cut off. Alright guys, then you're going to want to grab your rulers out and measure how tall from the base that mark was that you made. As you can see here, mine looks like it's about 1.7 centimeters. Then you want to go ahead and make a mark the same distance from the bottom along both edges, and you know, a couple more in the middle if you feel like it'll help. Before you start going and cutting it, just make sure it's perfectly straight by lining the ruler up against the bottom, because the clay does move around a lot and you just really want it to be straight. Then just go ahead and line up those dots you made in the clay and cut it. Wrap it around the base, then flip it over and make sure there are no gaps. Now we move on to the stem. Get a piece of green clay and roll it out to the thickness that you want. Don't make it too thin because you want it to be strong enough to stay upright, but we are going to be putting a piece of wire in to help with that. And after you bake it, it is surprising how sturdy it becomes, so you don't have to make it too thick either. This is how thick I've done mine, and the length is about 7 centimeters. Next, get your jewelry wire. We're going to put that inside the piece of green clay. Make sure you got one that's on the thicker side. I bought this a really long time ago and threw away the packaging, so I can't tell you exactly how thick this is, but the whole purpose of this piece is to help the green piece stand upright, so you want it to be not too thin. Cut a piece slightly longer than you need. We can cut the excess off later. Cut a line down the center of the clay. I'm just cutting it about halfway through. Then put the wire straight into the middle and then close it back up. I keep a little piece hanging out the top just because if the wire starts sliding through the bottom, I can pull it back up. Smooth the cut up with your fingers as best you can so that it doesn't look like it was cut at all. Next, you're going to want to measure exactly where the center of the base is so that you know exactly where to put the stem through. Please excuse my hair dangling in front of the camera. I need a better filming situation. I always accidentally put my head in front of where I'm trying to film. Now you found your center, stick the stem all the way through. When you flip it over, you should have a big ugly piece of wire hanging out the bottom like this. We're going to bend it over. The clay is still not baked obviously, so just be careful when you're bending it over so you don't smush the clay. Try to get it as flat as possible, and then we're going to cover it with another piece of clay. I like to flip it over and press it down against a flat surface to get it as flat as I possibly can. Make sure you're happy with the positioning of the stem and then go ahead and bake it. Once it comes out from the oven, we're going to cut off this little excess piece of wire on the top. As you can see, we can still see the wire though, so just get a little piece of green clay and cover that up. You're going to want to try and blend that in the best you can so that it's not really noticeable. Now back to the bottom. We need to cut out a piece of clay to cover this ugly mess under here. Forgot to show this in my materials list, but I just used an oval cutter for this. Get your piece of clay, put on a little bit of Sculpey oven baked clay adhesive, and then stick it right on. You can leave it like this if you want, but this is still too ugly for me, so I'm going to to try and blend this clay into the existing clay. This part's quite tricky and it looks really super ugly right now, but if you keep at it, you will get there eventually. I'm just pressing it down on the flat surface to try and flatten it as much as possible, and then I just continue smoothing it out. I pretty much just leave it at this, and then I'll clean it up with acetone later after I bake it. Now we move on. I'm going to be showing you how I make the fake soil to go in here. All you need is 2 slightly different shades of brown and just chop them up into lots of tiny little pieces. This takes quite a lot of clay to make enough to cover the base. To be honest, this is probably the most boring and annoying part of the whole process. What I've got there is nowhere near enough. I just couldn't do it all in one sitting because I was getting bored. Once you are done, mix the colors up and then get the Sculpey oven baked clay adhesive and put some on the base. This part's pretty straightforward, obviously. Just fill it up with the fake soil that you've made. Like I said, it takes quite a lot. Just try and make sure that you fill it to the point where you don't have any gaps. When you're done, it should look like this, and then just go ahead and bake it. Now that you have baked it, go ahead and get some acetone because we are going to clean up the base. I just put the acetone on these little makeup remover pads. Actually, I think I forgot to list these in my supplies. Sorry guys. And then I just kind of rub it over the bottom. What the acetone does is it eats away at the clay a little bit, so it can get rid of any little bumps or ridges and kind of smooth it out. But that also means you don't want to apply too much of it because you don't want to eat away so much clay that it goes all the way down to that wire. Also, don't use the acetone on unbaked clay. It's way too strong and it will ruin your work. After I'm finished with this step, it looks like this. So much better and more smooth, and I'm quite happy to leave it like this. Now we are going to move on to making the flower. This is the color I used. It looks like it's the same color as the base from here, but it's not. It's a little bit, the base is a little bit more brown and this one's a little bit more not brown, I guess. Actually started with this color and I added a little bit of brown to it to make the color for the base, and I do have like a full tutorial on how to make this beige on my channel, so if you want to make this color exactly, I'll link that video down below. Anyway, so you're just going to shape that into a circle, or actually I should say sphere. Once you're happy with the size and shape, we need to make sure that it's got a little indent in it so that it can fit over the stem. To do that, I'm just going to place it on the stem and gently press it so that I can get a little indent into the ball. Just do this really gently and slowly. If you try and work too fast, you will squish the ball. So just take your time with it. Make sure that you push it far enough in so that it won't fall off easily because you want it to be quite sturdy on there. Once you think you're happy with it, just make sure that it can come on and off without too much difficulty. Next, we are going to be attaching the petals to the flower. Obviously, you can use any color you want, but I went with rainbow, so these are the colors that I used. I want them to be quite thick, so I put it through my pasta machine on the thickest setting, and then I folded it in half as well. I used this little oval cutter to cut the shape of the petals, but if you don't have one, you can just freehand it. If you are doing it freehand, a good way to keep size and shape consistency is to cut one that you like first, and then you can use that as a guide to trace over for the other ones. Or you could just do what I did in the start and cut a piece of paper in the exact size and shape that you want and trace around that. Now, the petals are going to be going around the sphere that I made earlier. So I found a cookie cutter that was about the same size as the sphere that I made. And what I did was I used that circle to cut away the bottom of the petals that I made so that I knew that the petals would easily fit around the sphere. You can see what I mean here. I'm just kind of testing to make sure it fits. Then what I did is I took the same oval that I used to cut the petals and I cut a little piece off the right side of the petal, and this was to allow space for the petal next to it to fit on the flower as well. After I did it with the first petal and I was happy with where I made all the cuts, I used this as a guide and placed it over the top of the other petals to make sure that I was cutting them all the exact same size. Now it's time to attach the petals. I just gently placed them around the flower in the exact positioning that I wanted them, and once I was happy with the positioning, I applied a little bit more pressure to make sure that they were fully stuck down and would not fall off. You do really need to squish them down so that they don't fall off, but don't squish them so much that you squish the petals, obviously, just because we still need to work on the face of the flower before we bake it. So we need to make sure they're really properly stuck on. Now, as you can see here, they're really fully stuck on, but because we have been touching it so much, there is a lot of dirt and dust and little bits of other colored clay on there. So we are going to get some rubbing alcohol and just clean that up a little bit. Rubbing alcohol I use for cleaning unbaked clay, and acetone for baked clay, as I said earlier. Next up, we are putting a cute little face on the flower. So I'm just using my extruder to get some little strips of black clay, and I place them on the flower for a little mouth and 2 eyes. Then I use a little bit of pink for some rosy cheeks. Last thing before I bake the flower, I'm just going to use one of my clay tools and add some extra details to the petals there. Now the flower top is finished and it is time to bake it, but absolutely do not bake it with it attached to the stem because it will stick to the stem and you won't be able to get it off. Bake it separately. Now that it is fully baked and come out the oven, I can notice there are some tiny little gaps between the petals and the main part of the flower. The petals are well and truly stuck on, so you don't actually have to fill these gaps in if you don't want to, but I just don't like the look of it, so I'm going to be filling them in. So I just get a teeny tiny piece of clay and then just use a clay tool to work it into that gap. It's pretty easy to do, it's just a little bit time consuming. I go ahead and do that with all the gaps that I can see, and then I rebake it. Alright, so now we're going to be adding a little leaf and stem to the side here. Before we make it, just decide where the front and where the back is. I've got this little joint in the clay on mine, so I'm going to make sure that that is the back. Roll out a little piece of green clay that is the same color as the stem and decide what sort of positioning you would like it to be in. This is around about the size and shape that I want mine. This bit's a little bit tricky because if it's too thin, it won't stand up on its own. So just make sure that the base is a little bit thicker. Then use a little bit of pressure to rest it up against the base of your flower stem. If you're having trouble sticking it on, you can remake it a little thicker, or if you need, you can use a little bit of the Sculpey oven baked clay adhesive. Once you're happy with how it is, bake it straight away so that you don't have to worry about it falling off. Even though it's thin, as you can see here, it's still quite sturdy once it's baked. Next, we're going to make the leaf. I used a slightly different shade of green to the stem because I wanted it to stand out, and I used a leaf cutter to cut the shape of the leaf. However, of course, if you don't have a leaf cutter, you can just freehand cut the leaf. Once I got my leaf shape cut out, I used a clay tool to add some little details to the leaf. But once you're happy with the leaf, get some of the Sculpey oven baked clay adhesive and stick it to the stem. Then bake it straight away so that you don't have to worry about it falling off. Finally, I wanted to add some tiny little blades of grass coming out of the soil. This is totally not necessary and might even get in the way if you're using it as a trinket tray, but I just felt like it needed a little bit of something, so I decided to add them. If you're doing them, use the oven baked clay adhesive again, just so that they're super sturdy and they don't look like it, but once you bake it, they will be super duper stuck on and won't go anywhere. Once again, bake it straight away so that you don't have to worry about them falling over. Now you are almost completely done. We just have to clean out any dust with acetone and seal it. I have gone ahead and sealed mine with the Boil gloss spray that I showed at the start of the video. When spraying the flower, I propped it up in this craft knife that doesn't have a blade in it, just so that I can get a full 360-degree spray on the flower. I would recommend using the spray outside because the spray sticks to absolutely everything, and wear a mask or respirator if you have one so that you don't breathe it in. Also, do not use this spray in humid conditions because you won't get a nice glossy coat. It will be sort of bumpy and matte. I try to make sure that the humidity in the air is below 70% when I use this spray. And there we have it. There is your final ring holder. I've already sold this ring holder, but I have the purple one that I showed at the start of the video available for sale on my website, which I will link down below if anyone is interested. Thank you so much for joining me, and please let me know if there are any other clay tutorials that you would like from me. Thanks for watching. Bye!